Hi, I'm Tom Stevenson, and welcome to Lecture 7B for Human Resource Management. We are going to be looking at performance evaluation and pay for performance in this short section here, and the aspects of how do we evaluate somebody, how they're working, how they're doing their work. It can be a little bit of a tricky area, but the reasons that we do it, obviously, evaluation to improve job matching, communication of organizational values and objectives. It's a good opportunity to do that. Information for self-improvement, professional development plans. You can be working with individuals when you're doing performance evaluation. Training and career development. These are all really helpful areas. Pay for performance, extrinsic rewards, remember. Information for hiring strategies. We hired this person with XYZ background, and maybe they're missing something that we actually need. We can change the credentials that we ask for, or maybe they're overqualified for what we do, and we don't need quite as much as they have. It gives us some good feedback information how we're doing that way. Retention and reductions. Well, we know what people are doing. We can have a good idea who are our best employees, who are our middle of the road employees, and who are our not so great employees, and have it well documented. That can help prevent lawsuits or at least defend us against potential litigation. Effects on the evaluators allows for self-reflection, a reminder for hiring practices. I always found it very helpful when doing performance evaluations because it's a good chance to sit down and really get to know your employees. As you'll see later in the course, though, you should be doing this on an ongoing basis, not necessarily as formally as this. This is usually once or twice a year where you'll have a performance evaluation process, but you should be having evaluation feedback processes with your employees as frequently as possible. Kind of depends how many employees you have, but 4 weeks, not longer than 6 weeks, very good interactions to be sitting down with your employees and giving them feedback on how they're doing. Telling them how they're doing once a year is not going to help them get better. Telling them on an ongoing basis can help them to get better, even weekly, bi-weekly, depends on how many employees you have that work directly for you. I remember when I was director at the college, I had around 70 employees, and we actually had to do professional development plans because of unions and that they weren't really evaluation, but professional development plans. And it was a challenge to meet with 70 employees. So to do that on more frequently than yearly would have been very difficult when you take about a half an hour to 40 minutes with each employee. And then you usually have about 20 minutes of documentation you have to do afterwards. So performance evaluation, though, it does give you, I found out many interesting things by sitting down with those employees, many skill sets that certain employees had that I didn't realize they had. And that was very helpful too when all of a sudden a teaching assignment came up and I thought, oh, I could ask such and such. They were really interested in this particular area. They might be quite happy to do that. So performance evaluation is done for those reasons. Managers may complain, how do I have the time, as I said. You, as an organization, you got to be really careful about performance evaluation. We talked about consistency. What if you got one manager that really gives high ratings because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and you got another one that's pretty tough and gives pretty low ratings? And meanwhile, this individual on this team gets like a middle of the road rating, and on this team they get a through the roof rating. Like, that would be the word would get out, and that would be problematic, right? You'd have distributed and procedural justice. So somebody would get a lesser bonus from this side, and they would hear about this person on that side. No, this person doesn't do half what they do. And so they would see something wrong with the process. And then you're getting into Hertzberg's motivator hygiene theory, where the hygiene aspects are acting as a demotivator. At the core is the fact managers really, a lot of people really don't like giving negative feedback. It's not a problem to give positive feedback. You got a star employee, that's not a problem giving positive feedback typically, but giving negative feedback can be challenging. So there's different ways that you can do that that can come across much more easily. For example, asking the employee to fill out where they feel they stand in certain areas and how they performed in certain areas, and then have discussions around that. The other thing is, if when you do a performance evaluation, you take the role of being a coach, so the feedback you're giving them is for them to get better at what they do, to offer them the training they need to get better at what they do. If you are seen by them as being genuinely interested in improving their ability to do the work so that they can be more successful in their careers, if that employee takes that to heart, you will have won that employee over. That's kind of the giver aspect that we mentioned earlier in the course, the Adam Grant. They will see you as being a giver while you're trying to help them get better in their career. And they'll view that feedback differently. And also, when you give feedback, you don't make it personal. You look at what is the issue, the core issue itself, and how you can get that individual to be better at it, and ask that individual what they need to help them to be better at that. So it's a lot of it is in your approach to it. And you have to tweak the approach depending on the personality and the individuals that you're dealing with. So what is being evaluated? The individual, the work group, the division. Who performs the evaluation? So there's a lot of different evaluation systems out there. The time frame, how long, how far in between. How much can you be measurable? Some people's work, it's very measurable. You did this much, this is what you produced, this was the quality expectation, very measurable. Others, like a lot of forms of engineering, are much more difficult to do on a quantitative, and very often it's got to be more qualitative. Time frame, short or long, can refer to the time in between. I mentioned the objective, subjective, relative versus absolute performance. How do you rate against others? So that the downside of that you can see is you're creating a dog-eat-dog environment where you got it competitive against others, right? So that can have a downward spiral, because now how do you get people to work in teams if you're rating them individually against others? Maybe teams being rated, that's what we discussed before with high commitment organizations. But individuals, that's going to be hard to have a high commitment organization if individually you're looking at those ratings. But very often that is the case, that is done. So you have to look at the company that you're working for. And so to try and even the playing field, like a bank might have that they rate employees a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, a number 4. Number 1, you're excellent. A number 4, you're one step from being out the door. And that manager may only have so many number 1s and number 2s that they can give. So they might, if they have 10 employees, perhaps they can give 2 number 1s. And then perhaps they can give 3 number 2s. And then perhaps with the 3 and 4s, they can give up to 5, right? So if you're an easy marker as a manager, you're limited. You can't give more than 2 number 1s. Problem with that is, like, that's good. That limits the easygoing manager. The problem with that is, what if you have a gifted team and you have 4 number 1s on your team? Not great, right? So every system has its pluses and minuses. There's always these constraints, and there's pluses and minuses to them. So what you have to do is maximize the pluses and minimize the minuses. Forced distribution versus unspecified percentages works with relative performance evaluation. What I was more or less just saying. Multi-source versus single source, 360-degree evaluation. That's where you get people that evaluate the employee from different areas. So if you're a mid-level manager, your employees that you manage, they would rate you. Other managers at your level would rate you. Senior managers that you deal with would rate you, and outside clients, suppliers would rate you. So you have this circle of ratings. I've had a number of times where I've been sent surveys by a company and been asked on how this particular employee does in their interactions with me. That's a 360 degree. Multi-criteria versus single source. That's where you evaluate on a bunch of different things. Probably a good thing, because if I'm an employee and I'm only evaluated like on bottom line profit, where do you think quality is going to be, right? It's not going to be very good because I drop everything. Where am I going to be helping other people? Probably not that much, because I'm not rated on that. I'm just rated on what I do. I don't want to be distracted. Fine versus coarse performance distinctions. Again, that's on the statistical information and how much can we get real detail and how much is more qualitative, subjective. So it ties in the things that we've been kind of talking about throughout the course. You know, if somebody gets a bonus and they don't see that it's right or it's fair, then there's distributive justice, which leads them to there's something wrong with this process, and then that's typically going to demotivate them the next time. Why am I going to put in all this effort? I put in so much effort this last year and I didn't get the bonus that I was expecting, which ties into Vroom's, right? With expectation theories and consistency and valence. They're not going to have the same kind of value in what they're doing. Intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. So it also ties in with the 5 factors. It should be representative of the organization's strategy, you know, the method of where they're trying to go. We have the overarching goals, and then we have our strategy built to meet those goals and our tactics that are adjusting to the strategy. The technology and work organization, how things are laid out, what's our ability to meet the technology and work environment. It can give us feedback on how well that is doing. Work from home, how is that doing? Has there been a drop off in performance from people now working at home during the pandemic as opposed to not? Or has it gone up? Why did it go up? Is it strictly because working from home? Was it fear of people's jobs on the short term? That can give high extra performance in the short term, but not the long term. Usually people peter out with that. How do they fit in with the culture and the evaluation? That can also be a mechanism to how that fits in with the team, the culture of the business, the workforce, and the external environment. So we can think about those things too when we're doing our performance evaluations. We can have points around that. We have questions around that. We can look for feedback depending where or what we're trying to make improvements on. Agency theory, when we talk about pay for performance, this is the aspect of what drives people and what risk levels are we at. If in construction or in manufacturing, we have people paid by piecework, so much a square foot is different than paying somebody an hour, because we don't know what we're going to actually get from that hour. This we know we're only going to pay $4.25 a square foot. Some people actually like working piecework because they're really efficient at what they do. They're highly motivated to do more, and they can see how they can really do a lot. You want to get somebody to focus in on learning to get very productive and efficient. You pay them piecework, and they will look at that very carefully, and the best of people, some people will either drop out because it's not for them, but the best ones will look at that, and they're kind of a marvel to watch in the production process of how they do things, because they've got everything down. We talked about lean manufacturing, lean construction, reduce waste. Well, they're trying to reduce waste. Now, you got to be careful. If you're managing this process, there'll be some people that try to cut corners on quality because they're getting paid by the end product. So you got to really monitor the quality. If they're not producing the quality, if you make them do something twice, they'll very quickly raise their standards up to the quality level that you expect, and they'll meet that because they don't want to do it twice, because then they're losing money. Whereas by the hour, well, if it's something more complicated, it's not easy to measure, we can't really do it by the square foot, it's going to make much more sense to do it by the hour, but then I've got more risk as far as what they produce per hour. But in most cases, that is what comes into play, is doing it by the hour. Even with this by the square foot, you run into people doing things where they're not actually working safely. And we talked about that when we talked about government stepping in to protect people from themselves. Piecework is a good example where that often occurs. It's not going to happen so much in an hourly employee. It's much more likely to happen in a piecework employee who's rushing. So employees are motivated through extrinsic reward. And we talked about that short term. There is a motivation there. There is, and you'll see it too. That's the problem also with doing a performance evaluation once a year. Coming up to the 3 months before the evaluation, the employee starts to pick up their pace. There's what we call recency bias. People remember what's most recent. They don't remember so well that the employee was working slovenly, as Adam Smith would say, the first 9 months. They remember, oh yeah, this one's been swinging around doing everything the last 3 months. And so then it puts a positive frame on that. That's recency bias. What have you done for me lately? So agency theory is directed at the ubiquitous agency relationship in which one party, the principal, delegates the work to another, the agent, who performs the work. It's kind of like the piecework in construction. It kind of works that way. Framing crews doing work for a framing company who is the principal, and they are the agent. And then they subcontract the work based on price to the builder. Agency theory is concerned with resolving two problems. The first is the agency problem that arises when the desires or goals of the principal and agent are not congruent. It's difficult or expensive for the principal to verify what the agent is actually doing. When it gets complex, you're typically not going to be getting into that, piecework kind of relationship because it's too complex. High task ambiguity is too difficult to do that with. All right. The problem is the principal cannot verify that the agent has behaved appropriately. The second is the problem of risk sharing that arises when the principal and agent have different attitudes towards risk. So when we think about pay for performance, there's different ways that can be put into place. Screening and sorting, hiring, production, retention, how we look at the performance level. Screening and sorting the information, that can give us good information for hiring and production. Rewarding the type of quality of effort, finding balance there with what's been produced and the quality of effort. Benchmarking, measurement of others outside the firm. How do others fare? Tournaments, measurement against others inside the firm. So there's benchmarking outside the firm and tournaments inside the firm. So how we measure against others. That's the difference there. I remember we used to do quality walks with Mattamy Homes, and they would get their subcontractors together. They would pick a subcontractor, so maybe it was the finishing crew, and we would go for a quality walk at the houses that they just completed all the finishes on. And we'd go room by room, and we'd look for deficiencies or defects. And then we'd want to know how they would prevent these defects from occurring in future homes. And I've mentioned how they wanted to win the J.D. Power Award. Well, they also had the statistics from Avid Ratings of how other finishing trades ranked in neighborhoods that were nearby, in geographically same location. Competitors. And so they would have their ranking, and they'd have the competitors' ranking. And they'd say the competitors' ranking better than you. How are you going to move your ranking up to be similar to theirs? So measurements of others outside the firm, benchmarking. Because one of the points was, well, if you're not going to improve, maybe we're going to go with them next time instead of you. So there was a lot of pressure in those situations as well with regards to the quality aspect. It was actually quite fun one time. I had a whole class of students, and they did the quality walk, and the vice president asked if the students would go through the house and find defects. And so you had like 30 students combing this house for defects, and the poor subcontractor was sort of standing there pale in the face. And then they went through them one by one by one. Ratchet effect, measurement against yourself. That sounds not bad until you start thinking about it, right? Measurement against yourself. So the first year, your sales target is $1 million. You achieve it. Now your boss says, next year I want you to get 1.1. Next year you get 1.1, you're successful. And the boss says, next year I want you to get 1.5. Next year you're successful, 1.5. Then the boss says, next year I want you to get 2. And you're looking at this, and remember we said that with the goals, they have to be realistic. At a certain point, you feel you've done yourself in. It's almost like the soldiering in Taylorism. You feel like, how am I ever going to get more than I'm already doing? It's like an athlete, how do I get that 1/100th of a second faster? It gets to be so hard. In the beginning, it's not so bad. You see rapid improvement, you grow, and it's like, wow. But as over time, it can have detrimental effect. Time and hurdle levels of measurement sets the levels of time. And you need this by this date. You need this by this date. So that was kind of my publisher example. I think I gave in another lecture where the publisher wanted to sign off on the book this fiscal year because they didn't want to go into the next fiscal year because they needed that to up their sales, their publisher amount for that year, because that was what they were being ranked on. They didn't want to wait till next year. They wanted it for this year's bonus. You know what? If they had 1 million different signings that year, they might have said, oh yeah, we'll wait till January, because then they probably want to start the new year off with a really good sort of kick at it. But if at a certain level they don't get more for getting more people signed up, then they don't care about that anymore, and they'll try to push it off, which may or may not be good for the company. Tying workers to firms pay based on seniority. Others include stock options, retention bonus, group incentive schemes. If the company does well, or it's a publicly traded company, they might, or if it's just a company and they have profit sharing, they might have a pool. So if the company makes $10 million in profit, they might have a pool that 50% goes into profit sharing. And then depending on your position, you get a certain percent of that profit. So that gives you an incentive that it's like you're almost an owner of the company because you get to share in the profits. Retention bonuses, like publicly traded companies do this a lot, where they give shares. So my wife worked at a big bank, and if you did well, you got so many shares, but you could only cash those shares if you were still with the bank in 3 years. So you don't get the shares if you leave the bank to go somewhere else in 2 years. That's a pretty good incentive to keep you at the bank. So, if you've worked there a number of years, maybe the first 3 years passed. Now every year you get to cash in on some of those bonuses. And if you leave, maybe you've got, $50,000, $75,000 in bonuses from the previous 2 or 3 years that are going to be coming up. What's going to be the pay difference? We talk about extrinsic rewards. Well, there's that kind of incentive there to keep your best employees still there. You're probably not offering those ones to, maybe lower line employees, but managers that you want to keep that have done exceptional jobs longer term. Besides all the intrinsic aspects, this is one way to thwart off a competing company, a headhunter coming in and trying to steal away some of your employees, best employees. So pay for performance is likely to work when the work requires a lot of complex technology. So it's less likely to work when it requires a lot of complex technology, because how do you measure it? It's not so quantifiable. Anything that's very difficult to measure, it's hard to put in pay for performance requirements. It's better to have salary performance and then performance related to maybe how the company does as opposed to the individual. The more the culture emphasizes cooperation. Again, you don't want that aspect where I'm competing against you if it's more a team environment, unless the pay for performance is based on the team, not the individual. Where one can rely more on intrinsic motivation of the workforce, that, as we said, long term, that is the best motivator there, is intrinsic motivation. So it kind of also conflicts, on the one hand, you're a heart surgeon, and on the other hand, you've got this extrinsic pay reward that if you recommend more surgeries, you get a lot more pay. There's kind of an incentive there. They found that in medicine actually with things like gynecologists. If the surgery for doing a hysterectomy was really paid well, there tended to be a lot more surgeries in that, which kind of meant, are they doing the surgeries because the patient had to have it, or when it was close, they kind of just did it for them because they benefited a lot too. So it's kind of some of those situations you have to be careful. Whereas if you want really surgeons that are doing the bulk of this from you want them well paid, whatever your pay system is, but you want them to be doing it because they want to help humanity and they want to help people, right? You don't want the driver to be, oh, I got through this one, can I do another one quicker today? That's probably not what you're looking for. The general social culture and the specific culture of the workforce militate or work against monetary distinctions. So again, I'd ask you to take a look at these questions, and that's a good framing point for us when we meet live in class, and we can discuss this. And as always, think about what were the things that really resonated today in today's class with you. Go back over a few of the slides, think about what that means to you, and then we'll discuss that as well. And it becomes more sticky if you sort of just look away and you try to think about a certain item, look back. If you're able to recall it, then look at the slides. It'll sink in a lot better. So as always, have a wonderful day. And I'm Tom Stevenson signing off for now.